Hello and welcome to Scale Stuff. In this week's video I'm going to be building and reviewing the Tamiya 1/35 scale Pteranodon. I've been going on a bit of a dinosaur kick of late and this creature fits the bill nicely to carry on with that theme. Only I do feel that I need to add that Pteranodons are not dinosaurs, they are in fact pterosaurs. So for anyone wanting to inform me of that, you can go jump on the comments of some other less educated YouTuber. Thank you very much. Anyway, let's take a look at what you get in the box. In the box you get a simple black and white instructions guide and 2 sprues of clear parts to build the model. I'm even going to mention the tech tips leaflet as there's really not much in this kit. A first quick look at the sprues is showing that this kit's pretty simple. It's going to take minutes to build. I think though it's interesting to see Tamiya trying something different on this kit. The clear off-brown plastic to allow the wing membranes to let light through is an interesting idea if I can work out what paint to use to get the full effect from this. Spoilers, I don't actually have any paint that can do that, and I don't think many modelers will. The sprues look pretty clean though, and yeah, there's very slight seam lines can be felt rather than seen on the kit that will need to be cleaned up. But other than that, the cleanup should be minimal. The kit also comes with a rather nice looking base featuring a rocky outcrop in the sea and a clear stem piece to give the model a flying effect. I'm not sure how effective this will look in clear brown plastic, but I'm willing to give it a go. This model was first released in 1981 and this is a 2024 boxed re-release. Anyway, with the first look out of the way, let's get on with the build. First thing to do is free all of the Pteranodon parts from the sprues. This clear plastic feels slightly more brittle than normal plastic, so care should be taken when doing this. Then it's time to start the cleanup. First removing the seam lines and tabs with a sharp knife. Make sure to check around the hands and feet of this model as there's quite a lot of side seam lines hiding around here. Also make sure to check the head as the neck's got quite a few seams on it in amongst the folds on the creature's neck. With the worst of the seam lines cut off, now it's time to clean off the finer ones using a sanding stick or nail file. It's strange, the entire build on this kit has less parts than some stages on a lot of other models. Now it's onto the building. The only bit to add here is the belly piece. This fits in well, but will need a bit more cleanup to blend the joins in. As this model is really simple to make, I'm going to make a little change to it. I don't like the down looking head on this model, so I'm mixing up some green stuff to change its position. Here I add a blob to the neck and blend it backwards and forwards to hide the join. Then, with a cocktail stick, I put a few creases into the neck just to blend it into the rest of the pterosaur. I nearly said dinosaur there, so yeah, gotta watch that. Hopefully the addition of green stuff will stop this model getting bullied by the other prehistoric creatures in the cabinet, as yeah, they're mostly green stuff at this point. Once I'm happy with the neck, I add a few drops of super glue to the green stuff. Super glue speeds up the curing process of green stuff, and yeah, this will allow the neck to hold its position while the green stuff cures properly. With the head on, I'm leaving the model to dry overnight. With the head dry, it's time to sort out the join between the belly and the body. Again, I'm using a small amount of green stuff on this to delete the join. With the seam lines cleaned up, that's the pterosaur built. This isn't a bad looking model. I'm happy with the head position in an upright position though, rather than a downward one, as posed downward I think it looks a bit like Jack in the Box. It sort of jumped up to surprise you. All that's left to do now before painting is clean up the stand and plaque in the kit. This is pretty simple stuff to do, just a little light sanding and scraping off of attachment nubs. This kit also comes with a 1/35 scale cardboard cutout of a human to show the dinosaur scale. But I have no idea how to work this into the model, so it'll probably just end up in the bits box. Next it's time to sort out the painting. First I'm giving the model a base coat with Humbrol 90 beige green. I fancied a change from desert tan on this model and thought I'd see what difference this made as a base coat compared to the normal tan. As always I'm spraying this up off screen and outside to avoid fumigating myself. This is what the model's looking like with the base coat down. Before I get to the pterosaur, I'm first going to put some basic colours down on the base. For the rocky areas I'm using Tamiya XF79, mainly to give myself some time to think about how I'm going to paint the flying lizard, as I get the feeling it's going to be a tricky thing to paint. Then it's on to painting the sea. For this I'm using Tamiya XF23 light blue. It's interesting on the base, as the blue will need to be washed darker and the rock highlighted lighter. Both of these being completely different colours will mean I need to be careful not to get any overlaps, though I'm hoping the crest of the waves will hide the join between the two later. Now it's on to the Pteranodon. First thing I'm doing here is giving it a wash with BS Dark Earth to turn everything back and get an idea of the details on the model. Next it's time to sort out the underbelly. Here I'm painting it in Vallejo US Air Force light grey. With this I'm dabbing the paint on lightly on all the underside areas. I don't want to overdo it at this point, as I'm not 100% certain how I'm going to actually paint this model, and yeah, this step's more thinking out loud. While I have this paint out, I also base the beak and crest in this, as this light colour will be a good base coat for brighter paint that's going to be added later on. Then it's on to painting the upper surfaces. For this I'm using initially BS Dark Earth, again dabbing this onto the model. I figure, probably incorrectly, that maybe, like a lot of birds, these creatures needed a bit of camo when landed, so I'm going to try and paint some sort of rocky camo on this model's back. For now though, this brown's just going onto the upper areas as a base before I get into the actual proper painting. Now I'm moving on to the beak and crest, painting another base coat down, this time using medium yellow, giving this ancient creature a bit of a modern bird beak look. Beak done, it's back to the back. Carrying on with the rocky camo theme, here I'm using black paint mixed with grey and brown to make a sort of muddy grey black. With this I'm dabbing it onto the back, trying to give it a pebbly sort of texture. I'm looking at images of birds and lizards that hide in rocks for inspiration here. But yeah, I'm not trying to copy any of them exactly, just get that kind of look and impression. With this, I'm also adding a few bars to the crest run, just to break it up and give it some interest. Then it's back to the belly. I've mixed up some grey here to give the belly the same pebbled look to it. Here I'm working on the higher lower areas a bit more, just to further add to the counter shading and try and blend the upper and lower surface together. Then in that same vein, I lightly dab over the back with this grey, just to keep everything on theme. Now, while I think about what I'm going to do on the wings, I'm going back to the base, adding a watered down coat of army painted deep blue to the base, just to pick out a few details on the sea. Once this first coat's on, I go over the areas further away from the rocks again, while the first coat's still wet, to darken these areas down a bit more to imply that the sea's deeper here. I build this up in 2 or 3 passes. Then it's onto the upper surfaces of the rocks. Here I'm giving the area a light coat using US Army dark green, just to simulate some sort of vegetation. With this coat I'm also streaking it down the sides of the rock to simulate some algae growth or something like that leaking down the side of the cliff faces. Next I'm sorting out the lower areas of the rock. After looking at a lot of reference pictures of seaside rocks, they all seem to have a dark seaweed band around the tide line. For this I'm using Dunkelgelb but mixed with black to tone it down a little bit. I'm painting this on all the areas where the tide might get to and the seaweed would naturally cling to. Now I'm going to give this area a highlight. For this I'm using the standard issue skeleton bone, dry brushing this onto all the rocky areas to highlight the details. I'm trying to go a little bit heavy on the upper surfaces to maybe suggest a colony of these creatures live there and their droppings have marked the upper areas where they perch. Then it's more highlights time, this time for the waves on the base. Here I'm using pure white as a dry brush to simulate the crests of waves on the base. I'm using a small square brush here as I don't want the paint to go everywhere. Where these waves meet the rocks, I dry brush dab the white paint on here to make it look like mist or breaking waves. I also dab this onto the areas just in front of the rocks to simulate white water or shallow water. Finally, with this white dry brush, I hit the tops of the rocks to further add to the bird dropping look on the cliffs. Next, I'm working on the wings. After looking at tons of images of wing membranes online, I've decided to base the wings on those of a fruit bat. For this, I'm using orange and BS dark earth mixed in a ratio of 50-50. I'm dabbing an initial line around all of the limbs and then working backwards, trying to get a fade on the wings and make it look like a membrane. I've never attempted this before, and yeah, I don't quite nail it, but it's a decent base, and yeah, it can be improved on. I had to work fast here as the paint really needed to be wet to get this looking right and sort of fade out properly. Now, still on the wings, I add a lighter tone to the areas further away to try and make the skin look stretched. This time, the same mix as before, but with some skeleton bone mixed in to lighten it. This works, sort of, but yeah, I don't like the brush marks. Once this coat's on, I dab over the area with a sponge while the paint's still a little tacky. This gives the wings a nice texture and lifts a small amount of the highlights, showing some of the darker areas underneath. Wing membranes are tricky things to paint, and yeah, never thought I'd actually be painting them. While attempting to sponge on some grey to the wings, paint lifted from one of them, exposing the undercoat. I actually quite like the effect, so here I'm using the sponge to take off some of the paint and make it lighter in the middle of the wings. Like with a lot of model making, sometimes you just gotta roll with whatever happens. To tone this back, once it's been exposed, I lightly wash over the exposed undercoat to bring it back into theme for the rest of the wing. For this, I used a very watered down coat of BS Dark Earth. While the wings are drying, I'm sorting out the base. Here, I'm framing it with some deep blue. I'm not taking this all the way to the top of the sides. I want it to look like deep water under the waves. Once the deep blue's on, I'm adding the plaque that this kit comes with. This I painted black and just used a silver marker to highlight the raised edges. Adding this to the front of the base makes the base look quite formal. The base on this model is really well done and benefits the simple creature build. Now it's back to the beast, painting the first bit of the beak. Here I'm using watered down black with a bit of brown in it to define the upper edges of the bill. I'm not sure how true this is, but apparently we're not entirely sure how these pterosaurs ate, as they used to think they skim fed, but apparently that's not possible with their build and they just crash into the water. But I reckon they probably just roamed around picking on anything smaller than them. Maybe they even raided small islands where there would have been like the biggest thing on two legs, allowing them to basically just be the local bullies. With that done, I'm cracking open the oil paints to work on the crest. Here I'm dabbing on some red to give the plain yellow area some interest. I'm putting this on fairly thin as I don't want it to look overpowered. Once the pattern's on in the rough area I want it, I smear the paint back a bit with a clean finger just to fade this out more and blend everything in. Then I'm doing the same on the beak. Firstly with red, I'm trying to make the beak look a bit like the beak of a grey heron. This run ended up being a bit of a practice run, as you'll see. Next, I went on to adding the black to the beak. This ended up overpowering the red on the beak, but ended up in the places that I wanted it. With the black on how I want it, I reapply the red to the beak. Learning from the first failed attempt, I add the red more as a greasy streak than as paint, and build this up a bit, rather than attempt to get like it done in a coat. I'm liking how the beak's looking now, so at this stage I'm going to leave it to dry for a good while because it's oil paint and it will take about 2 days to cure properly. Now I'm going back to the back of the wings, fixing this with a light wash of BS Dark Earth just to tone the highlights back. We're on the final stretch now, just sorting out the eyes before I do a few other bits. Here I'm painting the eye in demonic yellow, using pure black for the pupil, and a white dot to suggest a reflection. Lastly, it's time to give the model a light wash. For this, I'm using a very watered down black. I'm using this to pick out a few details on the model and give the model a few shadows in the creases and pick out details like the gaps in between the Pteranodon's fingers. I'm also using this to add a little light speckling on the wings, only doing this lightly to give the areas a bit more interest, almost like kind of liver spots or moles on the wings. But with that on, I think I'm going to call this model done. This is the finished model. I'm really happy with how it's turned out, but I think I could have done a better job on the wings. But there were something new for me to paint, and I did enjoy painting them a go. In conclusion, the Tamiya 1/35 scale Pteranodon is a nice model, simple and quick to make. The model only needs a light cleanup and a little bit of green stuff to get it seamless, making it suited to a modeler of any ability. The model has probably aged the best out of all of the Tamiya prehistoric creatures and is fairly accurate to what people think they look like today. I also really like the rocky outcrop base, as I think it really sets off the model and, something different in the cabinet. Even though I really like this kit, there are a couple of things that I don't like about it. Firstly, the clear plastic. As though a really nice idea, I personally couldn't use this clear base to its best potential, though I'm sure this clear base could, with the right paint, make an awesome wing membrane, allowing light to shine through and give the model a true skin wing look. But yeah, I'm not quite sure how you'd have to go about that. I also found this clear plastic a little tricky to paint, as I could see my base coat on the opposite side, and it wasn't really sure when you've got the proper coverage. Also, more of a personal nitpick than anything, I didn't like the down looking head on the Pteranodon, but chose to fix that with green stuff, which to be honest was a fun thing to do and kind of helped bulk out the build stage of this model for me, as it was mindlessly quick to make. Costing £8 brand new, I think this model is well worth the money, as even though it's only a quick build, it can be painted in any way that you want to represent this still fully not understood flying lizard that's totally not a dinosaur. Anyway, that was my build and review of the Tamiya Pteranodon. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video and found it helpful if you're building or thinking of buying one of these kits at home. If you made it this far, please consider subscribing, as it really helps the channel out. Until next time though, look after yourselves and have a good one. Goodbye.